It's the Monday night party. It's Monday. He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. And on Mondays, we party. What we really do is we get you ready for a classic Monday night football game. Tonight was no different. Mike, first and foremost, how's your weekend? Are you feeling ready for Monday night football?
I think so, yeah. I'm setting into a nice rhythm with this. It gives me something to look forward to again, which I guess is the whole point of us running all these old Monday night football games. And this one's a doozy, too, because kind of like the other one, the 06 game that we watched with the Saints was one I remember a little bit, but this was really like, this is my sophomore year of college. So 09, the whole saga around Brett Favre and the will he, won't he, finally landing him back against his old team was pretty fresh in the memory still.
So, yeah, tonight's game is 2009 Packers at Vikings, and this is significant because this would be the first time that Brett Favre took on the Packers as the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. And I, much like you, it was interesting to go back and watch it because once we knew that this was the game we were going to get, I went back and looked at it. Admittedly, I was on a tour bus at the time, right? Like I was in music, and I remember watching the game, but I don't really remember understanding exactly how much the game meant, how much significance there was to this particular game. So, Mike, it was interesting to go back and really recapture the moment and the passing of the torch that we were watching of Brett Favre. Now we know we have the advantage of seeing history. Brett Favre being great, but also Aaron Rodgers saying, hey, there's a reason that I'm your quarterback now. So it was really fun to go back and see that with the knowledge we now have from what's happened.
I mean, the whole thing, like remembering that whole saga was so uncomfortable, like so unbelievably uncomfortable, the waffling that went on there. Forget like Aaron Rodgers' whole entry into the league where he was one of those guys that we watched uncomfortably on draft day slide to the back half of the first round. But then on top of that, you got the will he, won't he thing from Brett Favre that first landed him in a Jets uniform, but then to end up back in the division. Like that was the kicker. That's where it got ugly.
Well, the slide, and let's talk about it for a second, because Aaron Rodgers really made a statement. He had a big game in this game, but for Aaron Rodgers particularly, we have this moment of he was expected by many to be the first overall pick in his draft. He wasn't picked at the top. He slid down, and all of a sudden it became sort of the green room memory for an entire generation of watching Aaron Rodgers just sit there awkwardly waiting for his name to be called. He instead gets called near the bottom of the first round. He's taken by the Packers, and then he just becomes a backup and out of sight, out of mind. Like the narrative changed on Aaron Rodgers. It went from this guy might be the best quarterback in all of college football and he should be the first overall pick. It suddenly became, well, he's a quarterback that has some holes to his game and he's a backup, but we're not sure if the Packers are really going to be comfortable making the leap. Like we forget all of that context that was skewing the way we saw Aaron Rodgers coming into that season.
Well, like, isn't it amazing, too? First off, it shouldn't be a surprise looking back on it that he slid because he had a soul patch back then, which is the form of facial hair that I can probably least condone in life, below the goatee even. But it makes it even weirder to look back on it now after we just did the Brady and Garoppolo thing a couple of years ago, right? Where, yeah, you had Aaron Rodgers get picked by a team that had a Hall of Famer and one of the maybe 4 or 5 greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game on their team still and playing at a level where you're like, all right, yeah, we still want him around. And then there was the waffling of retirement. And unlike the situation where Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Jimmy Garoppolo all sitting there in this love triangle that didn't really have a lot of good feelings in it, that ultimately ended with ownership deciding, hey, we're going to side with the quarterback that's been here and helped us win all these games and push the other guy out. This one, Green Bay and Green Bay and Brett Favre, those conversations that were had, and certainly the bad blood there between management and Brett Favre that ultimately ended in him retiring and then unretiring and all that stuff, like made it far messier than even a situation that we look at now in the Patriots situation and think of as this really complicated modern love mess. This one, I mean, pales in comparison to what the Packers went through.
I mean, you think the Tiger King stuff is awkward? I'd love to have the cameras that go back and show us what was really happening behind the scenes, because the whole concept of retiring, not retiring, in, out, like it became a joke about Brett Favre at the end, about not understanding who he's going to play for, where was he going to play, when was he just going to step away from the NFL altogether. I mean, it became sort of the end of his legacy became more about laughing at whether or not he was interested in playing football than it did about anything he was doing on the field.
Yeah, oh, it was. I mean, the amount of like jokes around Brett Favre and breakfast food because of all the waffling that went on was the thing that honestly sticks in my mind about that entire experience of him leaving Green Bay. And so now you get the comeback and you get the matchup that everyone was kind of looking for. Like, again, the Brady Belichick comparisons just keep coming up, but these were two players on the field that everyone wanted to see go head to head in all of this. Like, did Green Bay back the right horse in all of this? And we can look and say that now, but it was, at the time, I think year 5 for Aaron Rodgers in the league, and he had spent the first 2 or 3 of them backing up. So we didn't have the benefit of knowing exactly what we were dealing with at that point, which was, like, for me, the original Patrick Mahomes. Like, go back and watch these games and watch this dude move around. And you remember, like, he was the guy before the guy we have now.
Well, that's a great point, Mike, because again, as you go back, the opportunity in watching these old games is to see sort of some of the mindset around everything. I was stunned. I mean, I don't think I really appreciated the moving around, the mobility in general, the ease, the flow, the grace for Aaron Rodgers as he was just running around and then flicking the ball. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. Like, some guys throw the football so effortlessly that it's almost like it's the Madden version where you just press the button and all of a sudden ball's off their hand. I was really stunned watching it, just seeing how effortlessly Aaron Rodgers played the quarterback position. Then it sort of lost in my mind.
It's part of like this last year in like 2019's regular season, watching Aaron Rodgers play. I've said on multiple occasions, it made me kind of sad because I remember this guy. Like, I remember watching the young Aaron Rodgers that was doing all these things that Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and all these very set in stone pocket packers weren't doing at the time. And then you have all the off-platform stuff and all the off-balance stuff. And you saw it like in the 2 games that the Packers and Vikings played that season, you saw all of that on display, like these moments of just unbelievable rolling away, throwing back across. And he had great receivers. Like, we'll get into some of the other personnel here. There's no doubt. But he made throws that only a handful of people alive could make. Now, he was staring across the field at maybe the original guy, one of the originals doing that, in Brett Favre, who didn't care what the hell the window looked like. He was going to toss it in. But, like, that was where, like, the love affair with Aaron Rodgers was born, was seeing this young athletic freak just take all these chances and make most of them.
There are certain moments in quarterback torch passing that we'll look back historically. Like, if you're my age, you remember when Steve Young took over for Joe Montana for the 49ers and the famous the monkeys off his back when he finally won a Super Bowl. And they're sort of passing the torch moments. When you watch this game back, it did feel like the fact that there was such a tremendous quarterback duel going on, it felt like there was just this need for Aaron Rodgers to want at that moment a passing of the torch, like just a proof of, hey, I'm here now and we're better as an organization because of it. We rarely get to see that from quarterbacks in this. And that's why, I think there was so much intrigue to this. I think the number was 21.8 million viewers for this Monday Night Football game, Mike, because the hype all week long was finally that we were going to get this head to head of these 2 incredible talents, but they were going to show us so much individually from 2 teams that hate each other, from a fan base that was now going to have to root against the quarterback that was sort of synonymous with their success for a generation. I mean, you roll all that into one, and it really is your movie. Like, it's like your WWE moment where you're getting best versus worst, evil versus good. It's everything wrapped up in one.
Well, that's the crazy part, too, is so this game was at Minnesota. This is the first game of the 2 that you play in the division usually. I went back this morning just for kicks and watched the second game they played that season back at Lambeau. And we talk about all the time now. We did it with like LeBron James when he went back to Cleveland for the first time, whether it was in Miami or at the Lakers. We've done it with plenty of athletes who leave home and then have to come back to a place they were for so long. The amount of boos for Brett Favre in Lambeau Field blew my mind. Like, there wasn't like, how you hear in the broadcast and a smattering of boos. No. This was a tidal wave of boos. This was wave after wave of boos punching Brett Favre in the face the first series he trotted out there. So this game that we'll see tonight, like, you have some of the tension, certainly, I'm sure, but it paled. Like, I had to remind myself, this is how bad the breakup went. And this is how ticked people in Green Bay were. Like, Green Bay, too, like the nicest fans on earth you think of in that regard. And they were that ticked where they booed an all-time great and a guy who won Super Bowl with them in that stadium. Like, it was just mind-blowing to see that portion of it later in the season.
Where does Vikings Packers, because I think this is important for context to that booing, where does Vikings Packers for those fan bases rank as a rivalry in your mind? Because we always talk about, Packers Bears, for example. We all know what that means to the entire NFL, to the scope of fans everywhere. But Vikings Packers, I think outside of the Midwest, we sleep on what an important rivalry that is for these two fan bases.
Well, I think it's two things. Like one, like it has a very interesting college comp. So like, yeah, you don't think of it as maybe the premier rivalry right off the bat, but it's a divisional rivalry. So that already carries something with it. And then you add this little bit of extra there. Like think about in college football, like LSU Alabama was not a marquee rivalry forever. Like Alabama's biggest rival is Auburn. But all of a sudden, Nick Saban leaves LSU to go to Alabama, and it's a little bit of a different feeling in all this now. So Brett Favre up and leaves them and has the detour in New York and all that stuff, but then ends up with the Vikings coming into their backyard. It makes it a little more than that now that it's gotten really deeply personal.
Well, and Favre going to New York, it feels like that moment a little bit for everybody paying attention right now in NFL culture. You got Tom going down to Tampa Bay, right? So like that's fine. You go down to Tampa Bay. If he goes to Buffalo or Miami, I mean, the way that Patriot fans are going to see him is far different, right? Like that's sort of the best, the closest I can come to here is if he goes down to Tampa Bay for 1 year, but then before you know it, he's the quarterback of the Dolphins having success against the Patriots. That sort of summarizes the way that Packers fans had to feel here.
Yeah, I mean, the closest I feel like we could have gotten to that with the Brady thing was if it had ended up working out with Indy, right? Just because of the whole Peyton Manning thing, what had gone on in the AFC for so many years there, those playoff battles that those two teams had. Like, that's the only way we could have gotten close because you're right. The division is the way to hurt it because not only did he leave, but also he can thwart your future happiness. Like in the division, only, like one of those teams wins the division. You can try for the wild card business, be my guest, but you can thwart happiness the same way Tom might have been able to in Indy, but now can't as directly in Tampa Bay, excuse me.
Yeah, Tom, please have some respect. Now, obviously, this was a big night for Brett Favre, and they've told me that I should mention that there were other big Monday Night Football games for Brett Favre. I mean, supposedly he had a big one back in 2003. I can neither confirm nor deny that I sat down and watched him absolutely demolish my beloved Raiders the day after his father tragically passed. He goes in and just absolutely crushes. These are the moments that, we talk about great athletes and their ability to sort of pour all of the emotion going into it. I think it's interesting because you mentioned the boos in Green Bay. There were some pretty good boos, I thought, at the beginning of this game from Packers fans that had made the trek to Minnesota. And I feel like all you're doing right there is making Brett mad. And it showed in the way he played. I mean, just absolutely lights out game for Brett Favre.
Dude, you may not to make this too much of a departure, but man, you mentioned that Monday nighter against the Raiders. Like, the movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie where they talk about core memories and these things that your life is built on. My football life, that is such a core memory. Like, I remember sitting around at some study group when I was in school at that point and just not paying attention to any of the classwork that was going on because I'm looking up and watching this guy. And like, that was the whole lead up because we all knew what pain Brett Favre was in. And he went out and just took an absolute blowtorch to the Raiders. It was one of the most impressive performances physically already, but then you knew all those things that went into it. It just took you to another level.
Gee, thanks, Mike. I had a radio station ask me the other day when I was talking to him. They asked if I was going back watching some of my favorite moments since I'm such a diehard Raiders fan. Like the most memorable is what they said, most memorable moments. And I said, you realize when you're a Raiders fan, most memorable moments, that's losing the Super Bowl to Tampa Bay or losing the AFC Championship game when I was a little kid, 51-3. I would put what Aaron Rodgers did to the Raiders in 2003 on that memorable moments because you went into it saying, man, like there was so much emotion to all of it in the broadcast and the tears. And then you're just watching him rip apart your favorite team and you're realizing you can't even be mad about it because in this moment, it's such a great moment for Aaron Rodgers. So he had for Brett Favre, I should say. Favre, by the way, had a big game, 24-31, 271 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, it was a charged performance for him, for a Vikings team that just felt like they came in with a different level. I'm not sure I believe in the let's go win one for Brett, but I don't know, Mike. You've been in locker rooms. You've stood on the field. It felt like there was a different level of let's go win one from the defensive effort side of it too.
I can't imagine, and you're right. Listen, all the guys in that locker room understand to an extent what he's going through because this is post, free agency NFL. So everyone's seeing and knows this could become you. But like, there's a difference. Like the Tom Brady legacies, the Brett Favre legacies. Like when you're so intertwined with a place like that, I can't imagine what it's like. Not in that case. Again, this place is in his new home, but like being in the visitors' locker room at a place that you've only been at home for so long, or having some of those same fans travel all that way to boo you. Like, it is pretty jarring, but at the same time, like, I was always I thought everybody loved being a road warrior, like going out there and in that case, not shutting up a home crowd, but shutting up the former team that I'm sure was going to have a few extra words for you. And the guys that you played with, a lot of them, and that still know you best. Like the people that could hurt you the worst are the ones that know you the best. So I'm sure all that stuff weighed pretty differently on a guy who also like wasn't peak Brett Favre at that point. Like he was still good enough to party, but it's not like you're going out there with the full complement of your power, able to bash someone's brains in if you want to.
I love the still good enough to party. He just went from being like good enough to party with anything to suddenly like he was drinking White Claw. It's like he's still partying. It's just not the same edge or aggression behind what we're seeing. So I wanted your thoughts as a former offensive lineman. Okay. Jared Allen, 4.5 sacks, but Jared Allen, just monster. What did you see from Jared Allen that was special?
Jared Allen's the thing that was special about him was always the jump, and especially playing at home. So I got to go and see Kyle Rudolph, who plays for the Vikings now, was one of my former roommates in college. His first season was in 2011, which was the year that Jared Allen was like this close to breaking Michael Strahan's single season sack record. And in the last game of the season that year, he had like 4.5 sacks in that game. And I remember this was before Minnesota redid their stadium, obviously. So they're playing inside that dome. And it is so deafeningly loud for home games there that it's like he gets a 2.5 start. Like if you can pause and look at so many of these plays, Jared Allen's across the ball and at the hip of the offensive lineman before the ball's even snapped. And at that point, you're dead in the water. The home field advantage that defensive linemen had there, and that group with him and the two Williamses on that defensive line, I think it sent 3 guys to the Pro Bowl that year before, in addition to Chad Greenway, their linebacker. So, like, that defense, I think, was number 1 in the league in rush defense for, like, 3 years in a row. Like, it was a freak show all the way across the board. But Jared was just built different when it came to get off. Because you look at him, like, he looked like a guy who had farm strength, but there wasn't a ton of, like, definition. He didn't blow you away physically. But, man, he had that get off like it was no one's business.
Well, and that was a huge part of this game. Obviously, like I said, 4.5 sacks, also had a safety in this one. And it was, I think, big plays, explosive plays. Because Clay Matthews had a fumble return. Like, we just saw big explosive plays from big-name guys. And it's funny because in the moment, that's the great part when you go back and watch these games. Like, I don't know that you necessarily appreciate the moment of what you're seeing as much. When you start to be able to put this moment into context for the rest of his legacy, when you look at how good Clay Matthews turned out to be, and you look at how great Jared Allen was over the totality of their careers, these are moments that were just like, you can look back and say, oh, of course. But to me, it just felt like we were watching a little bit, to go back to video game football, just video game explosive football from both sides.
It was crazy. And like, really, like, going back on it, you forget how good the defense is. Like, we focus so much on the quarterbacks in this game. Aaron Rodgers got sacked 8 times in the first game and 6 in the second game. A lot of those were on Aaron too in this first game. Like, you kind of look back on it and see, this is a guy, you knew what the good and the give and the take was with him. But, man, just, like, looking around on the rest of that field, like, we know what the headliners are tonight. But you mentioned, like, Clay Matthews was a rookie there, like, the first-rounder coming out of an SC defense that I watched single-handedly take apart, the Notre Dame team that I was playing for at the time. Percy Harvin on the other side for Minnesota, who, again, to reference one of my buddies, said Percy Harvin, probably pound for pound, the most physically gifted player he ever saw in person. And it shows, man. Like, you see some of these guys that because of injury, like Percy Harvin's an all-time what could have been player, but you see what he was like before all those hip injuries took hold, and you just sit there and your jaw's on the floor half the time because anytime he touched the ball, you were worried about that thing going to the house.
Also, I found it funny watching back even then. The Packers just have never really been able to run the football with their, like, it's funny how we laugh about like how Marino never got a running back. I was watching them, like, even back then they couldn't find a way to run the football. It's been this many years. Find a way to run the ball.
Dude, again, I went back and watched the second game that season. So week 9, they played for the second time, and it was at Green Bay. And at that point, week 9, over halfway through the NFL's regular season, Aaron Rodgers was the second leading rusher on the Packers behind Ryan Grant. Like, that's an insane thing to think about. Now, I get it. Like, they had Donald Driver and all these dudes on the outside, but, like, holy hell, man. Aaron Rodgers, again, super athletic, but also, you're right, not a lot of depth there when it's handed off to Ryan Grant or John Kuhn in the heart of those aren't Boos, they're Kuhn's era.
I cracked up watching Aaron Rodgers because Aaron Rodgers is capable of doing anything. We understand it. And you've made the Patrick Mahomes analogy. I think it's a fair one. I think it's a good one to how well he was playing, but it just also makes me look back to what might have been if they've been able to give him any support in that portion of the offense for the Packers particularly.
Well, you remember when they won the Super Bowl, I thought they finally put it together. Like, you see shades. It is also amazing, too. Like, my favorite part about watching football from, like, the early to mid-2000s and getting towards 2010 is just how much they're under center. Like, think about now we have a league that's like 75% shotgun and nickel. And the fact that John Kuhn is on the field and there's a fullback there all the time. And Aaron Rodgers is taking these drops from under center a lot. People are rushing on first and second down almost religiously. I mean, I heard actual palpable shock when Brett Favre threw on first down on a play. Like, that's how far and how different football has come stylistically. So you're right. It was a wonder that they couldn't run even in a world where, like, that was still good. Like, we have good Adrian Peterson in this game. Like, Adrian bleeping Peterson back when being Adrian bleeping Peterson was the best thing that you could be.
Yeah, but there's also a moment when I'm like, Adrian Peterson just playing lights out. The same Adrian Peterson that's still trying to play lights out in the NFL. At running back, I mean, come on, that is impressive. And to think that that's not Adrian Peterson Jr., that's still AP coming in, to me was impressive.
Oh, it's mind-blowing. I tried to write that guy off like a year ago, and then he just shows up after getting sat down week 1 and keeps plowing over people. But it is a reminder, like, with him and Aaron Rodgers, guys clearly not throwing their fastball anymore. Like, enjoy getting to capture time in a bottle from when they were the greatest at what they did, or in Aaron Rodgers' case, starting to make that ascension finally. Because, man, it was really something special to watch, and I like forgot how much fun it was. Like, Aaron Rodgers is one of those football players I'm almost romantic about because in my childhood he was just that dude.
So you mentioned Aaron Rodgers had a big game, 26, 387, 384 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick, but it really hit me watching the game that you could see the pace was so much different. I mean, the game itself moves faster because the clock isn't stopping as much, but the pacing, getting up to the line of scrimmage, it felt more calculated. And I was watching it as it felt calculated, thinking, my God, what would Aaron Rodgers' numbers look like if he had been in modern offenses back then compared to the offenses that we see now?
Well, and like, remember, like, that's the coaching tree that birthed like Andy Reid and a lot of the guys that we talk about now, what was going on in Green Bay at that point in time. But it was just like the rules were completely different. Although it is funny in this broadcast to hear people often reference that you just can't touch the quarterback like that anymore. In 2009, like, oh man, come party with me in 2020 and really see how we can hit the quarterback in this day and age. So it's completely different. Like, even looking at the size of the players, like, look at Phil Lodeholt and Bryant McKinney playing tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. Those are 2 of the most terrifyingly large men on planet Earth that you will ever see. And that was just how we built tackles back then. Like, it wasn't quite the guys. Now, it's not to say these guys weren't athletes, but you just see the body types. You mentioned this one last week, Jason, we were talking about it. Like, body types change at positions a lot over time as the demands on you increase, as the amount of snaps you're playing and the amount of times you got to pass it in a given game really start to go up.
Well, and explosiveness. That's the other thing that I think I noticed. Like, obviously, anybody that's ever seen me in person realizes that I'm not going to tell anybody about personal training, right? But I felt like I was watching a lot of people do like the sled drill. Like, can you get something and can you just move it through the mud, right? Can you move it through the mud? Versus now, where I feel like there's just a bigger clap on everything that you see and you hear. And like everything, that first step now is so explosive and violent. It felt different back then. It just felt like it was more about like wearing you down over the course of a play and over the course of a drive and over the course of the game.
And like just seeing like the guys at the beginning that were going to like see that transition, like TJ Lang was playing his first football during the course of the season, a guy who we've already seen now come and go over his time with the Packers, and to live through all those offensive changes and to live through the tempo increase and the move to shotgun and having your quarterback dropping back as many games and putting that kind of stress on you. It was a completely different animal when you could do that. And when on the other side, you hand the ball off to 28, you just watch him do the greatest thing you've ever seen.
All right. So now I'm going to ask you a question that then would have been impossible, but now we have context. All right. Now that we have a body of work on Aaron Rodgers and we already had a body of work on Brett Favre, who in your mind had the better career?
Hell, I mean,
you're welcome.
You probably got to give that one to Favre, right? Like, Aaron Rodgers still has time to complete that one, and Aaron Rodgers has been such a freak in the way that we talk about quarterbacks. But my God, like, it was Brett Favre, and I get it, like the interception numbers, all these things that Aaron Rodgers has certainly become really averse to now, and modern analytical football really does not like him for traditionally. Like, Brett Favre was the polar opposite, and there's just something like Brett Favre was so insanely fun to watch in that way because he just didn't care. And you hear all these stories and folklore about how he didn't know what the nickel defender was until a few years into the league for him, how he would purposely, just especially early on, just try and throw the ball as hard as he could so coaches would see it on tape and want to put him in. Like, all of that stuff is so fun to build into the folklore of players back when we were allowed to do that because we didn't know as much like we do now.
It's a great point that there's a bit of air. There's an air of mystique and like legend status, and there's an air of playground status. And I'll go back to the Mahomes comparison you made because there's a level of athleticism that we saw even then from Aaron Rodgers that made a lot of sense to that comparison. There was a level of just improbability to Brett Favre as well that felt like it was in that same sort of realm. And we forget, I think, over time how much we saw that from certain quarterbacks. That's part of the exercise I think that's fun and going back and watching these historic games is to see that like there are dots you can connect that lead you to players that we're seeing today like Patrick Mahomes.
It is amazing too with Aaron Rodgers. Like, we did the Tim Duncan thing to him where it's a compliment, but it really is meant to be like limiting so we don't have to do anything. Like, everyone always calls Tim Duncan the greatest power forward to ever play. And then we conveniently live him out of all these conversations surrounding big men because he played the five for a large stretch of his career and because those things kind of meld together after a while out of the generation conversation with him. Much the same way we do that thing with Rodgers where we go, oh, well, he's the most talented player to ever play the position, before Mahomes came along and likely will, undo a lot of that conversation. But when it came to the Brady Rodgers thing, we always just used to say, well, Tom's the most accomplished, but, Aaron Rodgers, he's the most talented guy we've ever seen. So we can leave him over there in that very complimentary box, but a box nonetheless.
Well, and that's a box. That's why there is still conversation about whatever the legacy for Aaron Rodgers will be. And I think what you can do is you can look at it and say, whether it was the style of football in 2009 or the style of football today, one thing we know is that Aaron Rodgers has adapted himself and that he's been able to perform at the highest possible level to whatever the quarterback position required from each of those different eras. It's harder to go back and look, but I think I walked away from this wanting to go back and watch early career Brett Favre stuff more. I want to deep dive into any of that. It also was a reminder that, by the way, if you're a Packers fan, I've said this for a long time to Colts fans, but I'll double down on it with the Packers. If you're a Packers fan and you want to complain about the quarterback position, I don't know, for 10 years after Brett Favre, it's not allowed. You're never allowed to say you are dissatisfied because when you've had two straight Hall of Fame quarterbacks, you don't get to complain anymore.
Yeah, from the people who brought you the Niners, the Packers, and the Colts, like, what an unbelievable string of, and all completely different circumstances too, right? When you talk about the way those things were born, what it took to get Andrew Luck to Indianapolis, and like we talked about at the very beginning of this, the draft night slide that ultimately landed Aaron Rodgers behind a Hall of Famer before he began his own Hall of Fame career.
Well, if there's anything I'm sure of, tonight's one of those games where they're going to do the replay. Obviously, it's coming up in just a minute. It's over on ESPN. Check it out. Watch it. But watch it from the beginning because it's interesting to hear the crowd right out of the gates for this. And, the storytelling is brilliantly done by everybody working the broadcast to really give you a sense of a great moment. Mike, I feel like I can make a prediction here. I think the Vikings win by 7.
I'm going to go call my bookie. It should be good.
He's Mike Golic Jr. I'm Jason Fitz. We'll be back here next week to continue the Monday night party. And we will get you set every single Monday night for a great classic Monday night football game. Enjoy 2009 Vikings Packers. Mike, let's have a little fun watching some old school football.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.